Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kyla Hannington, and I'm the Public Engagement and Outreach Division Manager for the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. And once again, it is just my privilege to be co-presenting an event tonight with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System. The library system has been our wonderful event partners for many years, but specifically throughout the pandemic, as we've joined you in the virtual space, bringing you programming and authors, artists, thinkers from all over the country. And it has really been an honor to do that. And tonight, I'm thrilled to have C.T. Salazar with us to discuss the new poetry collection, Headless, John the Baptist, Hitchhiking, which is a coming-of-age chronicle of a queer Latinx Southerner. I want to take a moment and just talk a little bit about 2022, which is the Office of Human Rights' 50th anniversary. It is also the Prince George's County Memorial Library System's 75th anniversary. So it's a big anniversary year for these two event partners. And for us, the Office of Human Rights, we're focusing this year on honoring the legacy of Teresa Douglas Banks, who was a dynamic Prince Georgian who gave her life literally advocating for the formation of our office, the Prince George's County at that time called the Human Relations Commission, that she was so passionate about the need for an agency such as ours in response to police violence against African Americans in Prince George's County in 1972, 1971, that as she was testifying for the formation of our agency, she had a heart attack and died. And as we look now, this has been 50 years, she brought our agency into existence. And we look at her passion for equity. We look at her passion for safety. We look at her passion for civil service. She was a council member for the town of Glenarden. She was on the school board. She was a teacher and administrator. She fought for wage parity. She was active in her church. She embodies everything that we want to be here in the Office of Human Rights. Passionate, committed to our community, and committed to equity. So in honor of Teresa Douglas Banks, we're also thrilled to welcome here tonight. C.T. Salazar, thank you so much for being here. C.T. is a Latinx poet and librarian from Mississippi. He is the 2020 recipient of the Mississippi Institute of Arts and Letters Award in Poetry. He is the author of 3 chapbooks, and his poems have been published in the Rumpus, West Branch, Cincinnati Review, Beloit Poetry Journal, 32 Poems, Denver Quarterly Review, and elsewhere. In this striking debut full-length poetry collection, the speaker is situated in the tradition of Southern literature, but reimagines its terrain with an eye on the South's historic and ongoing violence. His restless relationship with religion eventually includes a reclamation of the language of belief in the name of desire. And as the poems assert, a headless body, quote, leaves more room for salvation. Through Salazar's South is not a tender place. The book is a petition for tenderness, revealing in both place and people the possibilities for mercy, vulnerability, and wonder. The lyric I, as it creates an archive of experience, is not distance from the poem's subjects or settings, but deeply enmeshed in a tangled world. In poems with lush diction, ranging from a sonnet crown to those that explore the full field of the page, Headless John the Baptist Hitchhiking seeks and finds where the divine resides. Praise our hollow bell bodies still ringing. CT, what a pleasure it is to have you here today.
Thank you, Kyla. It's great to be back.
It's great. I was going to say, this is our second time. We had you in the fall too, right? So thank you for being here. Could you take a few minutes just to open us up by talking about the work?
Yeah. So it is Headless John the Baptist Hitchhiking. It's a book that I've been writing for, it's been like a 7-year process now. So it's wild to actually just think about the fact that it's a book now, that it's out, because for so long it's been a book in process, but it's just kind of, as a lifelong Mississippian, Mississippi is an ongoing place in it, and it's just it's its own terrain in a way. But yeah, I'm glad it's here.
Yeah, it's well, I have a lot of questions about Mississippi and its place in the book. And is there a few poems you'd like to maybe start us off with, and then I'll jump into all my questions?
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. If you guys hear some rumbling too, there's a mischievous black cat in the room with me as well. So maybe we'll get to see him soon. But so this is actually the the first poem of the book. It opens the collection. And I realized when I was thinking about this event today that I don't think I've ever actually read this poem out loud in public. So I figured this would be a good space to try reading this one out. This is Sonnet for the Barbed Wire Wrapped Around This Book. You were the first to show me what my blood looked like, and praise be the first to say no to my soft body and sharp apology. And I know your name by heart, no trespassing. You tight metal fist, in glory, your after kiss. I saw you barbed on Christ's bleeding head, and new heaven speckled us like cattle. Like I could be a wound cruxing the field. Come dawn, I'm a Saint Blue parable, so telling how paradise takes and takes. And maybe I wanted the world to wrap around me regardless of what that meant. And on my arms, these torn constellations made me heaven, and my chest of bright stars. Okay, and I'll just keep going. I'll just read a few.
Awesome, thank you.
This is When the Crows Came. I didn't hate them. They needed to roost, and I needed a purple deep enough to convince the neighborhood boys of my skin's milkiness. I don't mind seeing strands of my hair in their nest. Pages of scripture I've torn out, strips of silver chocolate wrappers, stray threads from old sweaters. They take it all, curious gods. The young ones chirp. Every morning my body is outlined in feathers, the whole bed dappled dark as a beginning. I don't know what to say, so I say thank you. The crows don't know what to say, so they don't speak. They just keep finding parts of me to make beautiful. I thank them for that too. I think part of the joy of having a full-length collection is trying to relearn where all the poems actually sit in the book.
That's one of my questions for later, actually.
Yeah.
Just ordering it.
Yeah, for sure. So this is the title poem that the whole book is named from. It's a self-portrait as Headless John the Baptist hitchhiking. God makes more sense this way. When blood flows from the neck, the body looks like an uncorked bottle, but maybe this leaves more room for salvation. The less of me, the less of sin. You said I was temptation, the way my eyes looked pure as pine in a window of white, but still called me a saint after I changed your flat tire. You're right. Holiness is in the hands, even if it's always the head that gets haloed. I said I wanted to worship something, even if it's just the black beetles in your yard crawling around hurriedly like pieces of a star trying to reassemble itself. In your apartment, we danced like we knew each other. You rubbed your hands against my neck and shoulder as if you were shaping me out of a blackberry vine. I said the dog mouth dark carried me here and laid me in your bed. I said lamb and felt myself become gospel in your hands.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Seriously.
Let's see. So a few of the poems in the collection are named after fragments of the Greek poet Sappho. And this is one of them. If you don't know, Sappho is widely held as being the first lyric poet written. And that's largely within the Western tradition of our idea of the canon, but she is still one of the early. All that dazzling dawn has put asunder, you gather a lamb. When you tell the story, you're the fox, quiet as fire, but just as hungry. If you believe this season and all its hunger has a father, you must forgive yourself for having his resemblance. Forgive me. I have been trying to cut the world down to a single sentence, one with your name in it. Your head is heavy, a little moon on my shoulder. The laws of absence say empty space begins where the object ends. So if the teeth around your door start gnawing, begin. If you open your eyes and find yourself held in the mouth of your own feral name, be gone. Hand me a scythe. If you mean the blood of a past season stains this present one. If you mean to keep your hands empty, let go of my shirt. Somewhere tonight, an abandoned mechanical bull is being coddled by a calf. The ending of every story is about wanting to be touched. You said, Lord, the field is opening its palm for us. Shadows pulling themselves together like the redeemed in Christ, reassembling their bodies. And the stars are doing what they always do. So, just in the process of writing this book, since it has been a several years journey, towards the end of making it, I kind of had not really a crisis, but I guess less detrimental, like a revelation that my own feelings towards a lot of my subjects and the things I thought throughout writing the book had changed, and easier than rewriting endlessly. It was just easier to acknowledge that the book is an ongoing conversation with myself in a lot of ways, and that it's okay to change your mind. And I started looking for a vessel, a way to embody the fact that some of this book, some of its ideas do contradict each other occasionally. And I found an ancient Greek form called the palinode, which is the palinode as a poem is a way for the poet to take back an idea that they wrote in an earlier poem. So it's a way to directly argue with yourself or change your mind. And I love that as an idea, that you're not just driven to one idea once you write it, that you have the ability to revise and to grow. So this was actually one of the last poems that was written for this manuscript. And it's Palinode, or Lullaby with Light and Dark. Sequoias sequined under moonlight, and the way awe says always, as if we really could live off this. I'm not saying it never existed, but it never existed the way I'm saying. I meant to say there were many stars. The sky was flag heavy with them. Your face shone bright under that nation, and I looked because I couldn't look away. And looking at your hands, you lying starward like a dare to flare out, I woke up from dreaming, two hatchets glimmering in the grass. At night we become statues, beautiful from any side. You said every eyeless earthworm throbbing in the dirt under the house was the mind and mouth of God. Imagine all the flowers we've trampled are growing in paradise, ready to forgive us. Because the roads, endlessness, and coming home alive both depend on bones and their ability to break into church music. And if the body becomes a pillar tarnished with the imprint of so many careless hands, and if I tell you now that I've been the evening, yes, I've been that late and full of flies. If I tell you the fog, for lack of body, must be my grandfather, that we all disappear like that, I take it back. Prayer. I hold antlers to my head, and my shadow swoons. Prayer. Horses run into the barn and dart out the other end as birds. prayer, the sign around the scarecrow's neck. My kingdom was kindness.
Awesome. These are
And,
so good, CT.
Thank you. Thanks, Kyla. Yeah, I'll read one more, I think, and then we can talk
Awesome.
about it if you want. Yeah. So several of the poems in the collection are written either through the perspective of or in conversation with Noah's nameless wife, who, at least in the Old Testament tradition, she remains unnamed. I do know that there's a Judaic tradition that does name her as Nama, but so these are all written. I think 3 or 4 in the collection, kind of in conversation with her as a person. So, Noah's nameless wife takes inventory. Horse heart, hyena heart, swan spine, silver fish shining in black water, yes. Timber wolf tooth, yes. Pity the ark with its belly full of glowing tongues. Touch the lion's paw only while it sleeps. The red-tailed hawk with jewels for eyes swallows the field mouse, and the mouse was the only proof the field existed. What else will be forgotten? The hawk will starve soon. We will starve soon. The dogs will howl like a god, learning the word for light, and nothing will howl back.
So good. It was so good. So thank you so much for reading and just getting us started like that. Because like it's one thing to read them, and I love reading your work. But hearing you read it is like another level. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was one of the poems that I wanted to talk to you about. There is a book called Not Wanted on the Voyage that was written by one of my favorite Canadian authors that nobody has heard of. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to talk to you about Timothy Finley, who is a wonderful Canadian. He wrote wrote many books, but one called Not Wanted on the Voyage. And it's about the Ark and who's not wanted. So including the women and Noah's wife. And so that poem had me think of her as a character and how she is written out and then written back in through literature, like what you're doing. So can you like talk a little bit, like how did this character, this person, shape your poems, or how did you come to her?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I wish I had an easy answer, but so those were all written around the time when I was getting to know my partner, back when we were still. I don't even know if we were dating yet. We may have just been friends during this, but we were still getting to know each other. And my spouse, she before we moved to our new place, she was a business owner. She ran her own bakery, coffee shop in Columbus, Mississippi, and a lot of the ideas that informed the poems in the Noah's Nameless Wife ones were written with from directly seeing just her struggle against being invisible, like as a woman who is a business owner. I saw her work like way harder to establish herself as a professional, to be taken seriously as a person, as a business owner, as a woman. And I know that had to have influenced those poems in a lot of ways, just from firstly being wowed by her as a person, and then kind of seeking out like other instances of invisibility through just certain subtext. And then at the same time, I'm also an archivist by education, so I'm constantly thinking about the politics of who gets recorded and who doesn't, and the privileges behind having yourself recorded and the power embedded in that.
Right, whose stories are told.
Right. Yeah. So probably just a combination of those things swirled into me thinking about not just the character, but the personness of Noah's wife, who in the Judaic tradition is Nama.
I'm just checking CT because I remember and I wanted to quote correctly. It's not here. So in some other, I don't think it's in here. Maybe there's something that I saw you share on social talking about your dad as a writer and that as you were just saying this, like who gets to be recorded and whose voices
Yeah.
is shared. And so can you talk a little bit about your dad and his
Yeah.
writing?
I actually, it's kind of funny to tell you, but I don't directly know a lot of his like personal writing, but I do know just from being told by my mom that he's a fantastic writer, that he's always written really well, that he can write incredible letters, that he knows his language, and that's just the privilege of who you get to be, and if you get to be, you know, a quote unquote writer, because there's plenty of people that are, I'm sure, writing incredible poems that aren't getting shared. Or there's plenty of people that would be writing incredible poems if they had the opportunity. You know, like if they were, I'm lucky in that all of my needs are met. So I get to write poetry instead of being super worried about being hungry, and it's an immense privilege to be with a platform, because that means that just all of my needs were met so well that I could have the opportunity to do this, and especially in Mississippi, like where, I mean, our best poets are most definitely sitting in the prison system here, you know, like because we're a state that incarcerates, we're a state that underfeeds, we're a state that's not healthy. So I mean, it's unreal to think about all the poets that we'll never get to read because they're not having the opportunity to write. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm so glad to be having this conversation, you know, like about how do we, for us to be aware of like what you say, who gets to be recorded.
Yeah.
Whose stories are we told and who is, you know, written out of history, either deliberately, you know, by the storyteller, not included. And then what storytellers do we hear? And I think that can be hard for us to sort through because you get taught what you get taught. And so you think that that's what's out. Like you just think, oh, okay, I guess guys write more books than girls. Like, I mean, you know what I mean? You have to sort of like really think about how things have, what are the systems that play that put things in front of your face, I guess. Right.
Yeah, for sure.
I know that you just read a lot, but well, actually, there's so much I want to talk to you about. It's hard to choose. The second poem, All the Bones at the Bottom of the Rio Grande. I would love to talk to you about this one, and I'm wondering if you would be willing to read it. It is, if you don't mind reading again, and I would just love to talk about it. I think it's amazing.
Okay, yeah, for sure. All the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande stick up like a cradle growing out of the mud. All the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande know the same song but cannot sing. They raise the river but only a little, as when Archimedes lowered the gold crown into the bath to study displacement. Displacement, noun, the moving of something from its place. All the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande know this definition. To replace with oneself what would otherwise be occupied with fluid, to be as much the river as the river. All the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande have changed their name to Rio Grande. The Rio Grande has so many names. Rio Bravo del Norte, Great River of the North, or Hanyapakwa in the Toa, or boundary or border to the desperate, or my love, I swear I'll come back for you. In between two halves of me, a river is running. I've named that river Rio Grande. That river named me survivor, named me lucky. Is there a word for the opposite of a miracle? There must be a sound, punctured whistle of air leaving the raft. All the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande needed a home more than they needed a lifeboat. All the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande I've inherited the way my mother inherited my grandmother's teapots. I've seen two shatter. They fell with no river to catch them. Is ruined by land a sweeter heirloom, imagined to be gone? Record destroyed. Archimedes' book of handwritten mathematics, a 13th century monk erased. page after page, filled with prayers to the Lord. All the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande rattle at the word erased. All the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande have finally found a place willing to make room for them, and all the bones at the bottom of the Rio Grande will reverse this river when their children call.
So good. So talk to us about this poem.
Yes, I think when this poem was written, it's probably one that I wrote about 5 years ago, and it was one of the earlier poems that would become this collection too. It was when I was kind of researching like family genealogies, and that was leading to its own separate education in like diaspora and all the different kinds of people that make up, I guess specifically like my inheritance, and all the different names, all the different languages, and just I don't know. Again, the struggle for a record too, because there's a lot just in studying like my own kind of lineage. There's a lot that's just not there because there's no sense of record under an empire that isn't interested in having you around. Yes, so there's a lot of records that are non-existent. So it's a lot of that poem was kind of not a reimagining, but an indictment of why I could end up in Mississippi speaking English of all the weird things that I could be doing.
I mean, it is an indictment. I thought it was powerful. And what do we have to answer for? What do we as a state, capital S state, nation state, and I like the line about the river, and I don't have the book open. Of course I close it just when I started talking, so I'm going to misquote your own line. I'm so sorry, but the river running through like two sides of yourself, the river running through you. I thought that was really powerful, in the whole line. And how is it for you? Like, tell us a little bit about you in Mississippi. Like, who are you in Mississippi?
Yeah, so I am a lifelong Mississippian. I grew up on the east side of the state in Lowndes County. And then in August, I moved for the first time. Thankful to still be in Mississippi. I'm in Cleveland now, so I'm in the Delta on the western side of the state, right next to Arkansas. But I've always been a lifelong Mississippian. But what is a Mississippian is very much, I don't know, I guess kind of flattened. Like there's, and especially here in the Delta, I see it too, that there's so many different heritages and cultures that inform the Mississippians here. There's so many different things that brought or took people here, and there's so many just, I don't know, there's a barrage of different selves that can become a Mississippian, and I think that that doesn't get talked about enough. But I am thankful that I know some like Southern literature teachers that just from being in class spaces with them, they're very interested in making sure that they appropriately teach all of the different kinds of Mississippian that are represented on the page in the state. But yeah, I come, my, I guess, identity is Latinx or Latino, only on one side, on my dad's side. And it's a culture I kind of had to reclaim in a lot of ways, because besides me and my dad, none of his family live in this state. It's kind of like I grew up without it or with it in the margin of my life. Like for the longest time when I was a kid, I thought Spanish was a language that people spoke on the phone sometimes, because I only ever heard my dad speak it on the phone. Like when you're a child and that's what you hear, that's the only way you hear it. You're like, oh, it's on the phone, people talking Spanish, I guess. But so yeah, it has been work to kind of more step into that identity of myself and learn about my own past, my history, and the kind of the histories that make who my family is.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been really.
I think writing, I think we talked about this before, but I know I've talked with other people about like writing yourself into existence. So I know outside Mississippi, there are many people who erase from view anybody who's not white. I'm just going to name it. And they'll talk about Mississippians, and they are specifically speaking about white people and a particular group of white people, to be clear. I think Casey Lehman says the worst of white people. And I mean, you know, and I think that is what that, and then what happens is that you erasing so many voices and stories and lived experience and identities and lived experiences and joyfulness and families, and like all of these people get erased. And so, and that's outside Mississippi. So I'm, you know, the fact that you are writing your in other, you know, we know so many wonderful writers out of Mississippi, of which you were one of them, and you know, claiming that space, like we are here and doing just incredible work. And it's really an honor to have you here with us in Prince George's County. So I just am thrilled to have you and the work. And I do, there's also poems. So those of you watching, so in full disclosure, I know CT because we sort of passed through an MMA program, like sort of like this. But I did at one point get to workshop. I was theoretically supposed to workshop a poem of CT's. And so when you workshop, it's like someone gives you their work and you read it, and you were supposed to say something about it, something helpful, something like, hey, I love this, or this didn't really work for me, or I'm confused about X, because you're supposed to sort of represent reader that doesn't have access to the author, and you can help the writer see what maybe doesn't work. So the poem that I had the incredible pleasure of reading in a workshop, I'm hoping you can read. It's one of those things that I think it is a poem that is on the page so powerful, but it's the Saint Torubio Romo. Yeah. Am I saying that right? Torubio, yeah. So this poem, the way that it works is that I'm going to hold it up, but so there's these two columns, and so you can read it down like this. Okay, wait, I'm going this way. I can work in a mirror. Or you can read it, wait, this is not working. I can't work in a mirror. Or you can read it across. And what's so incredible about this work is that it's like two poems in one, and it's completely extraordinary. And so I'm hoping you can read it, but I will finish my story very quickly to people watching to say my workshop comments for CT were something like, this is the most amazing poem I've ever read in my whole entire life, and I have nothing to say other than you're amazing, which is not the purpose of workshop, but I'm hoping you can now share it, because it really is such an extraordinary work.
Thanks, Kyle. Sure. Yep. So the way I haven't perfected reading it out loud, because it can be read in different ways, but the way I've been doing it is I'll read it kind of down the columns first and then across. So Saint Torubio Romo of Guadalajara. I should explain as well. So Saint Torubio Romo of Guadalajara was he's now known as kind of the patron saint of border crossers. He was helping people move into the country of Mexico and then out into the U.S. And he was found out. He went into hiding with his sister in an abandoned factory, and the Mexican government, like the military police, I believe it was, kind of on his trail, raided the factory, and they found his sister. And on the record, Romo's last words were, because the military police asked where his father Romo, Romo stepped in and said, "Here I am," which really interested me, because it's very, very biblical to say, a very biblically intense line. So I love that kind of that moment, because we don't know if this is what was said, or kind of we kind of make our own gospels as we go with our new stories, but kind of the same bones of every gospel always make it back in some way. So this is Saint Torubio Romo of Guadalajara finally stopped praying when they shot him Here I am. Say it when you're covered in dirt like a priest deep in the bowels. We know we're men because our angels don't recognize us, our bodies fissured by black. Lord, believe me, I've tried, but the desert could hold its breath. St. Torubio Romo's prayer is the empty rifle shells of his last morning. You'll learn not to turn from the name that slithers around. Don't let the catacombs frighten you. The skull seems sinister, but that could be your uncle. It's hard to tell bones apart, or any ancestor of yours, really. Aquí estoy, but do not kill me, like a dog lost in damp corridors of some factory. Yes, our wars outlive us, and our children bury bullets, each wound a mouth singing to suffer the drought a little longer. Remember how forgiveness gathers inside the exit wounds, how siblings hold us when we're dead, the bones that build your heritage in your hands. Any relic left behind is a miracle. That could be your father if it has the right bullet hole. Almost every saint has them. You all look so similar. Saint Torubio Romo of Guadalajara finally stopped praying when they shot him. Here I am, aquí estoy, but do not kill me. Say it when you're covered in dirt, like a dog lost in damp corridors, like a priest deep in the bowels of some factory. Yes, we know we're men because our wars outlive us, our angels don't recognize us, and our children bury our bodies fissured by black bullets, each wound a mouth singing, Lord. Believe me, I've tried to suffer the drought, but the desert could hold its breath a little longer. Remember, St. Romo's prayer is how forgiveness gathers inside the empty rifle shells, the exit wounds of his last morning, how siblings hold us when we're dead. You'll learn not to turn from the bones that build your heritage, the name that slithers around in your hands. Don't let the catacombs frighten you. Any relic left behind is a miracle. The skull seems sinister, but that could be your father. That could be your uncle if it has the right bullet hole. It's hard to tell bones apart. Almost every saint has them, or any ancestor of yours, really. You all look so similar.
Really is so amazing. I know that I was the most worthless workshop person you've ever had, but it's still so extraordinary to me. Like, so your work, I think I think your work is brilliant from a writing, from a written perspective, from poetry, like from the form. But the other part that gets me, and it's one of the reasons I'm so grateful for you coming to our office and doing work with us, is it's so, the personal is political. And so you're writing and talking about identity and talking about immigration and violence at borders. It's critical, and it's critical for our time. And I mean, I know that you wrote that poem several years ago, and it was important for our time when you wrote it, and it continues to be extraordinarily relevant. And so I guess I have two questions that I want to get to, and I'm probably going to forget one once I ask the first one, but we'll see if I can come back. But when you're writing, like, are you going for to evoke an emotion in the reader? Are you going to make a political point? Like, do you have a starting point that you're hoping for?
Yeah, sure. So this is probably a really strange thing to like say out loud into a camera with other people. But at least when I'm in the process of writing, I very rarely write with a reader in mind. And the reason why I write, like the whole why I would approach a page to begin with, is it's very much a process of like self-discovery.
Mm-hmm.
So writing for me is a way that helps me process how I think or feel about something, and that something is usually conversations I've had with people, not even like good or bad or grand conversations, but just regular conversations with people. What I what I see or what I hear other people doing. So writing for me starts as kind of a process of learning how to articulate and just learning in general, like how I feel about those things. And that might make more sense too if you know that I'm a very slow writer. Like I very rarely sit down and write just one draft fully. I'm usually writing a line or 2 lines like a week. But yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. I mean, I think that, so here's the thing with writers, and for those of you who don't know, like I like to write things down myself. And one of the things that we talk about, and especially if you go through like writing programs, like whether it's an MFA or you're taking creative writing in high school, or not even creative writing, you're taking literature. We've all probably taken a literature course in high school. And we get taught over and over again not to confuse the voice with the writer. And I think in poetry a lot, there was a temptation to say to the poet, well, when you say here that you, and then you quote the poem, and the poet often, I think, feels like, well, that's the voice. It's not necessarily me, So we know this, but yet I know that when I read your work, it feels very personal to me. And I catch myself having to say the same thing, that this isn't necessarily CT. This is the voice of the poem. And it's also true, I think, that as a writer, and I certainly see this in your work, that you're not separating, well, I shouldn't say what you are not doing. It doesn't read to me that you are writing about something that's crazily different than your own experience, right? Like you're not writing about being like a rock on Venus and what that experience is like. But I think that that's part of what I love about your work so much, is that you're addressing critical issues for our time, and they're critical issues that you see, whether you experience them or you see them or you witness them around you. Like, so I feel like you're doing social justice work in the page, and that's a lot. I don't really think I came up with a question there, but can you find a question in all of that?
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for that. Like, that's a really nice reading of my writing. I do think that, as not just me, but like a lot of writers that I know, or at least writers that I kind of see myself in tradition with, of course they're writing political, what we would call political. Everything is political. But like, of course they're writing political work. Of course they're writing or addressing the things around them, and it's just because the writers that I feel closer to are the ones that are paying attention. Like, not just a writer, but an active participant in their own world,
Right.
and situating themselves in the moving, living world. And I always want to make sure, I try really hard to stay close to my subjects in my writing. I write, a lot of people I know are in my writing. A lot of the lines that inform a lot of my writing can be direct quotes from someone else, and I'm always careful to not appropriate them, not to harm them in any way that they have no power over. Like, you can build a really unhealthy dynamic in writing if you're not careful, and you could teach an entire class on classical poetry that has fully taken advantage of other people by manipulating them in language and putting them on the page in a way that they may not have consented to be. But I always try to be incredibly close to my subjects and just be as vulnerable as I can be, knowing that I'm putting other people in my writing with me. And I feel like through that process of vulnerability, it's a healthier relationship, because it's like, yes, I'm saying something about you, but I'm saying just as much about me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So kind of like an invitation to maybe we could all get better about being honest about what we need, and maybe we could learn what we need and learn how to articulate those needs
Yeah, I love that. And we all get better at being honest with what we need. And I think I see your work as doing so one of the things that I say in my job, which is doing outreach for the Office of Human Rights, is that I try to put together programming in which people can both have the opportunity to both see their experiences reflected and also have opportunities to learn from an experience or someone who's very different than themselves. And that was kind of like my holistic kind of vision. And what I feel when I read this book is that I felt both that I saw myself, and I'm not joking, like it was very real, that I felt as I read these poems, both seen and you know how sometimes you feel seen, and in one way that makes you less lonely, but it also makes you lonely at the same time, like
Yeah.
because it's somehow yeah. So I felt that on a very personal level, like I was witnessed here, and in the same collection, and sometimes even in the same poem, a feeling of understanding or an added depth to someone else's, a completely separate experience. It was like a connection to our common humanity. And I think to be able to do that is, I mean, what a gift that is to us, CT. It was very, very well done. And I think of some of the writers that we have shared. We have had Jackie Trimble on. We're actually having Jackie back on April 4th. We're very excited to have her.
Her new collection, like shameless plug.
April 4th. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
No. So it's a quick commercial. April 4th, come see us once we talk to Jackie Trimble about her new collection. But she's another writer that I think does this incredible job about talking about very important, critical, ongoing social justice issues that are right here, right in front of you. There's a lot of emotion. There's a lot of call to action. Mm-hmm. And you can read that and also have this warmth and growth and opening and being seen and being witnessed. Like it is really, really incredible work. I see you as intersecting a lot in that type of connection that you make in your audience.
That's really awesome. And Jacqueline too, like just, I mean, how she can be incredibly direct while also constructing just a beautiful argument of a poem, like argument in kind of the poetic sense of all the ornate ability that this poem can pull off while still being so direct, not hiding in these metaphors, not clouding herself from the argument that the speaker's trying to make. Yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
For those of you watching, and I can see that we have a few people here with us. So first of all, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We would love to have any questions or comments. If you'd like to type anything into the chat where you are, we would love to interact with you. So please feel free, if you have questions for CT, type them in and I'll make sure that he sees them. And thank you very much for being here. I have a question, a general question that actually one of my friends said. I was talking about poetry and, oh my gosh, I'm having CT and this book is so amazing and blah, blah, blah. And my friend said, I don't really know. I feel like I'm not, like there's something I'm supposed to do to get poetry and I probably don't need to do it, but I feel like I do. So can you talk about like, how is somebody who maybe hasn't had a lot of exposure to poetry, how do they start?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've been encountering this more as I've been doing workshops with younger and younger people that have had less and less exposure to poetry. I think the best like advice that I can give is to know where you are and to actively seek out the poets from your own community. Like look up poets that are from your state, that are from your city even, because I feel like you share a kinship with them that may not even be explicitly stated, but they're going to be writing in a language that is so familiar to you that you won't have to even do that work of that. What am I supposed to do to get this? You'll get it immediately because someone so close to you is writing it, besides that, I don't really know. But yeah, just know the poets from your community and just know that they're writing for you in a lot of ways. So I think that you'll enter their work in a much in a way that gives you a little bit more clarity.
As you know, we're co-presenting this with our Friends Prince George's County Memorial Library System, and you're a librarian. So I have a lot. There's a lot behind this question. So one of the things that we have been working with in our job, with some of our events and our Youth Leadership Academy we've been talking about misinformation and the threat to our democracy. That we see when there is limited access to information, when there's, misinformation or limited access to information. So as a librarian, so first of all, thank you to all librarians and library systems everywhere for the access to free space and access to information that you provide to people everywhere, because that is the Lord's work. That is amazing, wonderful work. So thank you very much. And how does this play out? Like, so you're in the Mississippi Delta, you're working for Deltas. I don't know where you're working. You're working for a university. I'm not going to name it. And how do you see the role of libraries, your function in terms of this, combating misinformation, assisting democracy? Like, does that play out in your work?
Oh, for sure. So Delta State University is the library that I work at right now as a reference and instructional librarian. And I'm in a rural area. Delta State University is a big library, but it's still a rural community. So we still see actively what you're describing as limited access to information, low information seeking behavior. So people who are not actively seeking out more information than what's put in front of them. So the work that libraries do to combat this is, I used to think it was that they exist, but it's so much more active than that, because it's not enough that a library just exists. But it's just libraries do the work of putting everyone on an equal playing field, whether it's access to information, access to the channels that provide information, access to internet, access to reference materials, like anything that informs an idea. I'm always very concerned when I see politicians doing the work of trying to criminalize libraries, or like trying to discount the work that libraries are doing, because when you put down libraries, you're actively making an argument against people with the least, the most vulnerable in the community. And the role that libraries play in just making sure that information remains accessible, because that is not, like, reason like information wants to be free, but the system we operate in puts constraints on things that it finds valuable, and information has value. Information has economic ties to it. So the work of keeping information free under a capitalist system that knows it could profit from from information doesn't want it to be free. It's a radical act that is making sure that every single person has the ability to participate in their world, in their society, the ability to be active citizens who are fulfilled. Like, there's so many different types of hunger, and it's not enough that we're all fed. Like, Mississippi especially just has, like, there's so much hunger for information. There's hunger to have more, to have what's needed. And that's, like, libraries just feed people.
That's great. So what do you feel, I mean, not to give you too much of a loaded question, but as we look towards, how can we be better humans in the world? What are some actions, what do you think is a step that somebody could take? I mean, I have some suggestions, but let me see what you've got,
Yeah. So to be a better person, wow. This is big advice to give somebody. One thing that I have been doing for maybe close to like 10 years now is just And I'm not saying that this is the path that like everyone should take, but this helps me think through just everything I do throughout a day. Like this helps me be a person. Is I try to harm as little as I can, and to really think through all the different ways that like that harm can be put on someone else. And that starts with, obviously not getting mad at someone, or not getting mad at someone in a way that like puts someone else in jeopardy. Like, like road rage obviously is bad. It starts with things that you can see immediately, things that it's like a one-step process to your action harming someone else. And then as you get better at that, you start thinking through more subtle ways that harm moves through our like social life, through our social strata. And it's complicated because I know that if I go to the grocery store and I buy anything, if I pay for something with a dollar bill, I've pretty directly harmed someone on the other end of that exchange, because I've bought cheap groceries in which someone in another country is not being paid well enough to pick, doesn't have benefits as a human. Like, so, like the methods of harm are so hard to avoid right now. Like it is probably impossible to live a life in which you harm no one under our present conditions. But that's what I try to do, is just harm as few people as I can. I make that commitment every day.
I mean, that is amazing. I try to harm as little as I can. And then, this idea, what a thing for us all to hold on to. I mean, speaking as somebody who loves a good rant, but really, how is that helping? But that harms, right? And so I think that I set you up there with a bit of a tough one, and you just came back with a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful answer. And I think it's something for those of us who, if you've tuned in tonight and you're interested in what the Office of Human Rights and the library are doing together, I know that that's because you care. You want to do as little harm as you can. And so, CT, thank you so much, because that was a wonderful way to close us out. That was a beautiful thought. Thank you. So we are at that time where I have to, we have to close it down. But I do want to let everyone know, first of all, those of you viewing at home, thank you so much for tuning in. It's always so wonderful. We have a great set of regulars, and I'm so glad that people came in. I want to take just a minute and tell you about a couple other events that we have coming up soon. On Thursday, we join with the library again to welcome John Elizabeth Stinzy on their brand new book, My Volcano. It came out today. So make sure you get your copy, because it's like super awesome. And next week, our Diversity Dialogue series continues on Tuesday. We are talking about the book, The Lighthouse Effect, how ordinary people can have an extraordinary impact in the world, which is a nice little circle back to what CT closes out with. And the absolute best way you can support writers and artists, the people who come, is by buying their book. CT's book, I happen to know, is selling out everywhere because it is completely amazing and wonderful and extraordinary. So go ahead and order it now from your favorite independent bookstore. It's also at Mahogany Books in Prince George's County. You can order from there online, or if you're in Prince George's County, go get it. But put your order in. It may be a little bit of a wait, because I do know that it is selling out like crazy. CT, thank you so much for your time. It's just been extraordinary to have you with us again. And, congratulations on this incredible book.
Thank you, Kyla. Shout out Alec in the chat. Glad you're here.
All right. Good night, everybody. Take care. And thank you again for being here.